Welcome to a mini episode of I'll Tell You What, the podcast that's all of Black history. I'm Ashley, your favorite raconteuse that shares these stories with you every single Monday. Subscribe, follow, leave a review, do all the things. You already know what to do. But since it's still Women's History Month, let's flip tradition on its head a little bit and talk about when the women were doing the proposing to the men. Think about it. I mean, it's rare, definitely not conventional, and yet it's something that's been happening for longer than you think and by people you might not have ever imagined. So let's get into it. Cringe warning. Let's talk about the women that have proposed to men, but in a historical context. So we all know that traditionally the proposal is one of the most gendered aspects of marriage. I mean, truthfully, the whole concept of someone just springing the request of long-term legal commitment on you as a surprise is silly. Like, it's so silly, but we could get into that another day. The expectation has long been that a man must get down on one knee and ask for a woman's hand in marriage, often with these very elaborate gestures. But women proposing? Though we as a society hate to see it in heterosexual settings, it has actually been something that has been happening for quite some time. So in medieval Europe, women were actually allowed to propose one day every 4 years. On Leap Day. The Irish tradition of women proposing on February 29th supposedly began with St. Bridget in the 5th century, though historians question the legitimacy of this. What is true is that some cultures, including certain African ones, historically allowed women more agency in choosing their spouses. I read that in the Serer culture of Senegal and Gambia, women had a say in choosing their partners. The Serer people practice arranged marriages, but women could refuse an arrangement if they weren't interested. Also, I think, and I could be wrong, but if a woman was particularly drawn to a man, she could actually approach his family with an offer, sometimes through gifts or mediation by an elder, but again, I could be wrong. I also read that the Akan people of Ghana also value women's input when it came to marriage. Traditionally, a young woman was consulted before any marriage arrangements were finalized. If she wished to propose marriage herself, she could send an intermediary to discuss the arrangement with the man's family. But again, this is another case where I could be wrong. Fast forward to recent times in Western culture. We don't like it. When those videos pop up on your FYP or your timeline or your feed, it is usually full of comments that say how much of an ick this gives, because truthfully, no one wants to see a young lady on bended knee in a food court pleading for her man who obviously doesn't feel the same way. I don't know. It's something about those videos that make me feel so uncomfortable. However, while it's still fairly uncommon, there have been some high-profile women who have taken the lead and popped the question, probably not realizing this, but challenging the belief that proposals are strictly a man's responsibility. And so that brings us to our first story. Did you know that Miss Patti LaBelle proposed to her ex-husband? So by the late 1960s, Patti LaBelle had established herself as a very talented lead vocalist, and Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells saw success. The group was on the verge of transforming into their more experimental and iconic LaBelle era, which took place in the early 1970s. So clearly, Patti was a rising star, balancing career ambitions with personal relationships. One relationship in particular was to then boyfriend Armstead Edwards, a former school teacher turned tour manager. Patti proposed to him, but there is a reason why. Armstead proposed to Patti like 2 or 3 times, and every time he'd ask her to marry him, she'd say no. Why, you might ask? She said, quote, "I just wasn't the marrying kind." But realizing she might lose him if she didn't say yes, she asked him. She said he told her, quote, "Let me give it a few days." And they got married 5 days later on July 23rd, 1969 in Maryland. According to Country Living, quote, "Per Patti, the reception was small and casual, featuring beer and soft shell crab." I love that Patti gave us the food details of a very intimate wedding. Their marriage would last for over 30 years before they divorced in 2003. In reflecting on her marriage to Armstead to Jennifer Hudson not that long ago, Patti said, quote, "I was married for 32 years to a wonderful man and we're still friends, good friends," letting everyone know that she had no bad feelings towards the man she popped the question to. Now, let's move on to another woman that proposed to her man. Did you know that Halle Berry proposed to David Justice? So Halle Berry and David Justice's relationship was one that definitely defined Black celebrity marriages of the 90s. For a moment, they were the picture-perfect couple, but the reality, their marriage was as short-lived as it was intense. Halle and David's love story didn't start at a party or like a premiere or on the set of like some blockbuster film. No. Halle first spotted David the same way a lot of folks did, on TV. It was 1992 and Halle was watching an episode of Rock and Jock, a celebrity sports game, when David caught her eye. But Halle mentioned him to a friend, but decided not to make a move like she'd normally do, at least not right then and there. Later, a journalist interviewing her would casually mention that his friend, David Justice, wanted her autograph. Well, this was Halle's moment. Instead of just signing something for him, Halle passed over her number, like, "Call me." A bold move, but you know what? It worked. It sure did. David called her and they talked for hours. And 2 weeks later, he flew her out to Atlanta for their first official date. And just like that, they were locked in. David was preparing to propose to Halle on her birthday, August 14th. He said, quote, "I knew when I first saw her that I was going to marry her. It was like I heard a voice." But he wouldn't get the chance to do so because she ended up proposing to him. Halle proposed to David. For what it's worth, he said, quote, "I knew I was going to marry her, but before I could surprise her, she surprised me." Months later, they got married on New Year's Day, 1993. But just 3 years later, their marriage crashed out. The marriage ended in a highly publicized divorce in 1997. Halle later admitted that the pain of their split pushed her into one of the darkest times in her life. But they both found love again later. And I know y'all remember this story, right? Anywho, let's keep moving along. Several Black women that we all know were the ones that did the proposing. But these women, in different eras and for different reasons, flipped the script and proposed to the men that they loved and admired. And they're not alone. I mean, famous white women have done this too, like Kristen Bell, Pink, and even Elizabeth Taylor said to hell with tradition and got down on one knee, sorta kinda, and proposed. So let me tell you about these 4 Black women that we all know that proposed marriage to a man. For some, like Patti LaBelle, it was a simple decision. Her boyfriend Armstead Edwards had proposed at least 2 times. And after saying no at least 2 times, she simply just didn't want to lose him. So she proposed. Halle Berry, on the other hand, was sprung on David Justice and just could not wait for him to ask her, which he said he was definitely going to do on her birthday. Last week, I told y'all how writer Dorothy West proposed to the Langston Hughes, though he declined. The reason why was speculated that she wanted to get married so she could have children, as her upbringing likely made her lean more conservatively than most would think, especially because she's queer. Jodie Turner-Smith, who we all remember from Queen and Slim, proposed to Pacey, or Joshua Jackson, while on a vacation together in Nicaragua. And I'm sorry, he's forever Pacey to me, so that's his name. But yeah, he said, quote, "It was very beautiful, incredibly romantic. We were walking down the beach and she asked me to marry her." They got married in 2019, but sadly would divorce in 2023. And y'all know, he's with Lupita now. But despite these examples examples of well-known Black women proposing to men has always been met with pushback, especially because of the Black church. Christianity has long framed marriage as a covenant in which the man leads and the woman follows. The expectation that a man must pursue a woman and not the other way around is rooted in scripture and is often referenced in sermons on marriage and relationships. Like, I know y'all know the story of Abraham sending Isaac to find a wife, or think of Ruth and Boaz. Exactly. In an August 2003 issue of Jet magazine, the late Reverend Patricia S. Webster said, quote, "As a Christian woman, the pursuit should be for God. In their pursuit for the right man, God will provide for them what they desire and need. Women putting things in their hands and not in the hands of God, who knows what is best for us." Even though today, though many Black adults aren't as connected to the church as they have been in previous decades or even generations, the gendered expectation of the man proposing to the woman is still enforced. Women proposing can be seen as desperate, too forward, or even as disrupting God's plan for us. But here's the truth. Love isn't always about gender roles. The women I mentioned prove that going after what you want isn't something to be ashamed of, despite none of these marriages actually working out. But you know what? You tell me. If marriage is truly supposed to be a partnership, why does it matter who asks the question first? Now, side note, I am just asking this question. I do want to say that as for me, myself personally, I would have never, ever have asked my husband to marry me because I'm just not set up that way, and that's just not my ministry, nor is that his. But we're not talking about me. We're not talking about him. I just wanted to remind y'all of that. Aisle runners, this concludes this week's episode of I'll Tell You What. Don't forget to subscribe, share, leave a review, and join us on Patreon for more love and for more Black history. See you in the pews.